Hello, I'm Natalie Haynes and I am a writer and broadcaster and above all classicist. So I spend my time talking, often on BBC Radio 4 with my show Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, now in its 11th series, about figures from the ancient world, some real and historical, some mythical, some somewhere in between. And I write novels, also about Greek myth. I try to put women at the centre of them because often our ancient sources did that and we've slightly forgotten as time's gone on. Ovid, Euripides, for example. And I also write non-fiction in which I usually talk about the way Greek myths have shifted through time and come to us in the modern world. My novel, No Friend to This House, is all about the story of the Argo and the story of Medea. Medea is a princess and priestess in Colchis, modern-day Georgia. She's a priestess of Hecate, who is a chthonic goddess of the underworld. And she is incredibly powerful. When Jason and the Argonauts arrive in Colchis, slight spoiler, then they need her help to try and claim the Golden Fleece. This is a story that's told brilliantly in Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion animation version, 1963, Jason and the Argonauts. But there is quite a lot less Medea in it, much as I love it. And also a very rare modern film to have Apollonius of Rhodes credited as a screenwriter on IMDb. I am, of course, serious. But I wanted to put Medea back into the story and see what happened. So I wanted to write the story of Medea because this is the Greek myth that I have been closest to through my whole life. So when I was a teenager and I'd started to learn Greek, Euripides' Medea was the first or maybe second Greek play I ever translated in class. It's the first Greek play I saw staged. I saw Diana Rigg play Medea at the Almeida Theatre in the 90s. My dad drove me down from Birmingham to see her, and it was such an extraordinary production and such an extraordinary performance that I sat through it. I guess I was 16 or maybe 17, and I knew as I was watching it that I would never be the same again, and I was absolutely right. Medea is presented to us in our ancient sources as having profound magical power. And this is derived from her relationship as a priestess to the goddess Hecate, who is a goddess of magic and of witchcraft. So often Medea is described as a witch or a sorceress. She certainly is both of those things, as well as I say, as being a priestess. And her capacity for magic is undeniable. She seems able to rejuvenate people. She's certainly able to protect them. She's also able to commit the most extraordinary damage with magic. She has, poisons or potions that would kill creatures in seconds. So she's an extremely powerful and dangerous individual. I guess I'm kind of loath to label her. I feel like witch is almost always a pejorative term, or sometimes it's like a counter-pejorative term, so people reclaim it because they feel like it's an insult and they want to have it back. And sorceress, I generally don't like gendering nouns. It's like, it just irritates me. But of course in Greek, then, nouns are gendered because that's how the grammar works. So I guess priestess is what I think of her as being, but it's certainly the case that most acolytes of ancient gods and goddesses do not have the kinds of magical power that Medea has. So yeah, if you want to think of her as a witch, I think she would probably take that. The question about whether Medea is a villain or a heroine is one that has been asked since antiquity, and I wish I could give you a definitive answer. I wrote my undergraduate dissertation was on the heroics of gendered infanticide in Euripides, Medea and Hecate, so I should know the answer, but I think she is both to me, probably. She does villainous things, but she does them as characters in Greek tragedy often do, under extreme provocation. And she is also, by the standards of Greek tragedy, she is a hero, insofar as she's an extremist. This is true of Oedipus, it's true of Ajax, it's true of Antigone. So this model of Greek tragedy that sees a heroic character not as we might see a hero, the good person, but as the person who is like a normal person, but taken to an extreme degree. Medea is that, absolutely, 100%. I mean, what I think of Jason could fill a book, and does. So I think he's the most interesting male character I have ever written. And the reason that I found him fascinating to write was because I've seen so many productions of Euripides' Medea over the years, and there are so many different aspects of his personality you can bring out. You can focus on, when he's first accused by Medea of kind of destroying their family, he's very sort of legalistic, he's very formal in his response. And the chorus says at one point in the play, they say, your arguments are sound, but you're a terrible person. I just don't agree with your conclusion. And sometimes you see him as being, just really weaselly and like wheedling. But in the best productions of Medea, you're never able to forget that there is an attraction between Medea and Jason that was enough to change the world, or at least to change their bit of the world. And I don't think there's a parallel for me in other Greek tragedies. The relationship between Helen and Paris, which obviously, destroys Troy in the longer term. It never feels as real. You only get such a short kind of glimpse into it in our surviving text. So in, Iliad 3, I guess, is the case in point. You don't get much of a sense of them as a couple. Agamemnon and Clytemnestra in Aeschylus's Agamemnon, I mean, it's not even close to being a meeting of minds. He's an idiot, and she is playing with him the entire time. He's never even close. He underestimates her always. But with Jason and Medea in the best productions, and I'm thinking of the Diana Rigg Medea, the Helen McCrory Medea, the Sophie Okonedo Medea, you get the strongest sense, or you should, I think, in my reading of the play, that they had great chemistry, that they had great sex, they had horrific arguments, and then great make-up sex. And so that version of Jason, he's not as smart as Medea, but he's not worlds behind her, in the way that Agamemnon is to Clytemnestra. This is a clever, persuasive, charming, delightful, delighted man. He is compelling. At least I find him compelling. But he's also a little empty. You'll have to see what you think. So the concept of a hero has changed a lot through time, and in Greek tragedy in particular, and Euripides' Medea is one of the great Greek tragedies. I think it's the best one by miles. The concept of what a hero is a little different. So for the Greeks, heroes in tragedy and before them in the Homeric poems, in the Iliad, the Odyssey, they're high status individuals. Medea is a priestess and she's a princess, but you also have kings, for example, Oedipus, or incredibly successful warriors, Achilles, of course, in the Iliad, or Ajax in the Sophocles play, Ajax. And you often behave in manners we would find reprehensible. Medea does terrible things in the Euripides play. Oedipus does terrible things in Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus the king. Ajax slaughters huge quantities of livestock and their shepherds because he thinks they're his comrades, because he's so insulted that he hasn't been awarded the arms of Achilles. He decides he's going to kill everybody he's been comrade to for a 10-year war just outside Troy. And so these aren't heroic characters the way we would think of the term hero, like the good guy who we're rooting for. These are often extremists and people you definitely don't want to kind of hang out with socially, but they drive the story. They are absolutely the focus of our attention at any given time. And Medea fits firmly into this idea of what it means to be a hero. She is always the character who has agency. She is always the character who is making impossibly difficult decisions. Do I allow my enemies to laugh at me, she says, or do I commit an unthinkable crime? You'll have to wait and see what I decided would be her answer. I think most of the women in Greek mythology have been misunderstood at one time or another. There are plenty of versions of the story of Helen of Sparta, Helen of Troy as she'll become, where she's monstrous, and there are defences of her. The defence of Helen was a sort of rhetorical device in antiquity. School children would be given it as a subject to write essays on, or their version of essays, their declamations on. Medea is absolutely one of these characters. So sometimes we see her in a role of as being very kind of witchy and other, barbarian, misunderstood. Sometimes we see her as a truly terrible wife and mother, and sometimes we see her as a very different character, one who has a very, at the beginning of Euripides' play Medea, for example, who has a very close friendship with the women of Corinth who live near her in this part of her life. So she is hugely complex and has often been misunderstood. People have often asked me over the years if I relate to the people in my books, and they are so murderous that I always feel like I have to issue a disclaimer. So, yeah, when I first read Euripides' version of Medea when I was a teenager, I can only tell you that her behaviour seemed to me completely reasonable, understandable. I can't defend that now. But at the time, I think she's an emotional extremist. And, you know, I think when you're 16, 17, you often feel like that yourself. Or at least, you know, I did. So I guess she is the person I have probably felt most like. I think as I've got older, I feel more like Cassandra, and certainly in the version in The Thousand Ships. It feels like the sort of curse of our age to be sitting there going, but if someone does that, then a terrible thing will... Oh. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a slightly dispiriting thing to have to think about, isn't it? Yeah, maybe Cassandra. Magic in antiquity is a really threatening and scary idea. So we get a lot of it in Apuleius's story, The Metamorphosis. It's usually called the Golden Ass because he turns into a donkey. Spoiler! Then he turns back from... Oh, I spoiled it some more. But magic and magic spells are a theme running through that, and they're a theme running through Greek literature before it. So obviously Medea is often viewed as a witch. She's feared because and revered because of her magical powers. But so is her aunt, Circe, feared and revered for her magical powers and her capacity to, for example, turn men into pigs or other creatures. So this idea of women as threatening a sort of natural order of things, Circe turns men specifically into animals, is kind of our idea of what a witch means is bound up in that. And witchcraft was something that was illegal. You could be prosecuted for at varying times in the ancient world, as of course in the less ancient world. In my view, it is generally a way of trying to punish and isolate women who are clever and skilled. And often you find these women on sort of the margins of societies. They will be the women that other women go to help them with difficult labours or childbirth or things like that. There's often an overlap between midwifery and witchcraft throughout history. So I guess when somebody saves a popular man's wife, then she's a midwife, and then when she doesn't manage to save a wife or a baby, then she's probably a witch. And so these terms are often used pejoratively, and it is simply another way of trying to remove power from women, in my view. So generally, if women do something, we're less likely to know about it in the ancient world because almost all our sources are male. And we have a few female poets, tiny fragments of their work survive to us, but almost all our literary sources particularly are male. And so we come to a kind of bit of a brick wall, or I guess a stone wall because bricks are later, when it comes to the lives of women in antiquity. And if it's their public life, we might know something about them, but often not. You know, there's a moment in the funeral oration by Pericles, the Athenian statesman, in the 5th century, 430 BCE, where he says the greatest glory of a woman in Athens is not to be spoken about in either praise or blame. And it's like, wow, so just not to exist at all. He is, of course, married to the most notorious woman in Athens at the time, a woman named Aspasia, who makes it into the work of, Aristophanes, the comic playwright, and others. So, he didn't practice what he preached, let's say. But you come across a huge problem when it comes to women's religious work, and that's certainly true for Medea, which is that men often aren't present in the kinds of encounters that women might have with one another in relationship to a goddess. For example, the Eleusinian mysteries, the mystery religious practices between, they're incredibly popular across the ancient world, both the Greek world and then later in the Roman world. But we know very little about what was done in Eleusis when acolytes to Demeter and Persephone came to Eleusis, which has a huge cult presence in the way that the Greeks saw their world. But we know very little about the kind of details of these things because it's forbidden to say anything about it. So in, for example, the work of Pausanias, 2nd century geographer, when he sees a pomegranate, pomegranates are sacred to Persephone, he's like, I can't say anything about pomegranates, it's forbidden. And you're like, dude, it's just the pomegranate. But you could be prosecuted for blaspheming the Eleusinian mysteries. You could be put to death for this kind of impiety. So we just don't know very much about it. So what women are doing behind closed doors or in temples where men aren't present, or even if men are present, but it's seen as being a religious and therefore forbidden topic of conversation, we just don't know a lot about it. So we have to do some guessing and some imagining.